And away we go, off to Nosferatu. You and I both watched this movie just last night. The new Nosferatu, to be clear, the Robert Eggers one came out in 2024. I'm just going to come out of right in the gates and say it. You and I haven't shared anything about this beforehand, which is unusual. I thought the movie was good, but I did not think the movie was great.
I agree.
Yeah. So I guess we'll try to spend this discussion backing up why we feel the way that we feel about the movie. I'm really going to try to talk myself into feeling better about the movie, because the more time that has passed, the more I actually like some of the parts I felt like I was hypercritical about. I think the movie is certainly worth watching, and I do think it is a good movie, but I just felt like not burying the lead and just coming out and saying how I feel about the movie, because I feel like so much of the time I at least circle around, and then the audience is left feeling like, wait, they just shat all over this movie, and then they got to the end and they were like, yeah, go watch the movie. and that's not exactly how I want to come across, because it's not accurate to how I feel about it. So
let's start by talking about what we liked then.
Yeah.
Because that might be easier, and then even though that means we'll probably be talking for longer about what we disliked.
For sure. I have a couple big things. First and foremost, you did read Dracula, right? You've read it? Yeah. This movie is, I believe you described it as slavishly true to the script.
Slavishly devoted adaptation of Dracula.
Yeah. I described it as Stoker's thrall, which is also pretty accurate. I mean, I actually liked that part of the movie. Like, I liked that it was very similar to the book, like it followed it. Where it deviated, I felt like was correctly a point of deviation for a director. So like the ending is different than the book. It's quite different. If you haven't read Dracula and want to read it, go do that, because I'm going to spoil it. Same for Nosferatu. We are going to spoil both of those. If you don't care, then just keep listening. But
Dracula, the novel's 130 years old, and the Nosferatu, the film, is over 100. So,
Right, the German one. That's Murnau? Or no?
Yeah.
Okay, it's Murnau. Yeah, but we're obviously the source material. That said, it does also pay homage to the original Nosferatu quite well as well. Like all the scenes with the like shadowy like hand and the background that you have with him framed in the doorway. Speaking of things that I felt were good, I really liked the natural lighting. Like, it was very clear that most scenes were naturally lit that were like inside. It was purposefully dark. Obviously, it was like kind of gray as well. I liked that aspect. What else? I felt like the actresses were the stars. I felt like they were the best actors in the movie, hands down. Emma Corrin, who plays Anna Harding, I believe is her name in the movie. Emma Corrin is the actress. She was really good. Lily Rose Depp was awesome. I felt like she was the best out of all the characters. Count Orlok was good. He was fine. What's his name?
Bill Skarsgård?
Yeah, Bill Skarsgård. No, I was gonna say Dafoe. Willem Dafoe was good. Obviously, there were moments where I don't know, things just kind of felt a little off with him, but Nicholas Hoult was fine. Like, I thought he was good.
Could have been replaced by anybody.
Yeah.
Any old white guy could have played that role.
Yeah. So,
and that's not to be mean to Nicholas Hoult, who I actually think has some great performances in him, just not in this movie.
Yeah. His his role was not necessarily at the forefront, but yeah, his performance was fine. It was fine. I like him too. I like him as an actor. What else? What?
Nothing. No, I think Rose Depp and Skarsgård held the film together. I think they were the best performances. Corrin, I could take or leave. I think that also could have really been anybody, but everything else I've seen Corrin in has been really, really good. So
Yeah, she was in Until the End of the World. What's that? The Crown. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, what else? I liked the framing of a lot of the backdrops that looked like paintings in a way, like to you, like your background. However, I did feel like it there was a little too much like emphasis on it, and it kind of just like took away from the movie at times.
All right. I thought the production design was the best element of the film. I mean, Eggers started as a production designer, and you can tell that's always been something that he's really rigidly insistent on getting right.
Yeah.
And I think it works. I do agree there was sometimes it did feel like there was more attention paid to the sort of atmosphere of a period piece more than there needed to be.
Yes.
But a lot of that felt like one of my larger criticisms of the film, which is actually how devoted it was to the source material, which is, yeah, that was my least favorite aspect.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I mean, that obviously we're just armchairing this right now, but like it's really hard to strike that balance between having such rich source material with so many adaptations of Dracula. Like everyone kind of knows like the basic premise of Dracula, like what a vampire is, basically how to defeat a vampire, right? And loosely its origins. But yeah, I felt like it was like too nitty gritty, and I think that. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about for the good before we get into some of the?
Yeah. I mean, I guess this will be maybe a point of debate between us, because I don't think that's a result of the production design or the direction failing. I think this is actually a mediocre script, and I think it's Eggers' adherence to the script in an attempt to build around his larger vision that ultimately detracts from the whole. Because I think his vision comes across really clearly. I think his direction in the film is top notch.
Mhm.
Like, this is first rate production design. I think the cinematography is excellent. Part of that is the lighting, which was just awe-inspiring as usual. And his again, just he can't get it. He loves the natural light, and I think it works really well. There's a lot of great motivated camera movement.
Yeah.
Part of it got annoying when there were a lot of slow whips or slow, like, circular camera moves that sort of faded away from characters or scenes or framing and into the black, which felt kind of like a reference to the way they used to shoot a lot of those old German expressionist movies that this so clearly is inspired by.
I agree with that, and I wish that they leaned more into that and had less fucking talking, because there was too many scenes of people standing around talking.
Yeah, so that's what I meant by the script was mediocre.
Yeah.
Because the script is, in an effort to make the story logical and an adaptation of Nosferatu, the film, and an adaptation of Dracula, the novel.
Yeah.
It has all these scenes of talking, which is actually, like you mentioned, Dafoe being good. This is one of the rare times where I think Dafoe is overused and a little too silly. Like, I'm something of a scientist myself, Dafoe. I love schlock Dafoe. I love Boondock Saints Dafoe. But this is not the film where that's needed. And so I feel like zany Dafoe bopping around talking about demons and the occult doesn't really mesh with everything else the film is. Like, it just feels like he needed to be sprinkled in, but he's kind of inserted awkwardly. And so that clashes with the scenes of Aaron Taylor Johnson crying or being angry, or that other fella whose name I forget off the top of my head, Ralph Ineson, who's actually, I think, excellent in the movie.
He was good.
I don't remember if he's in The Northman. He is in The Witch, but he's a great actor, and his use is really similar to Skarsgård's use. A lot of his dialogue you can't understand, and that's by design, and I like those elements. but then the really stuffy, stilted, staged period piece scenes where they're talking about class and this sort of thing don't work as well. And I think the film was it was doing that deliberately, but
Yeah.
it just didn't work for me because it's, to your point, that was like 45 minutes to an hour and a half of the runtime is dedicated to that shit.
Yes, and that is one of my biggest criticisms of the movie is the pacing. The pacing felt off consistently. Some of that is due to the pacing of the novel. Well, I would say like most of it is due to the pacing of the novel. The novel, for those of you that are uninitiated, is a collection of journal entries or diary entries, which sounds awful. Usually I'm not a fan of that, but I actually really like it in the novel. I think it works really well because it's like stitched together little stories that have been collected and pieced together is the basic premise of the story. But the movie takes like quite a bit to get going, like to get Nicholas Hoult at the castle, and then it still takes a bit to like get the ball rolling, and then is like really hung up by a bunch of scenes of people indoor discussing contrivances, basically, which is really hard to balance, like we said, because you do kind of have to explain, like, the bullshittery with Count Orlok with what he's trying to do by moving. But I wish there was more. I wish more of the movie was done visually and less discussion based. I mean, like, they cut out the character of Van Helsing, for God's sakes. Like, just cut out another character or another two characters and get to the point.
Oh, Willem Dafoe just is Van Helsing.
Right. He is, but he's not.
Well,
like they didn't do as much of the killing, or at least they did different killing than in the book.
Yeah, well, this is an adaptation of Nosferatu, which is in and of itself an unauthorized, very loosely adapted work from Dracula. I think part of the problem with Nosferatu is it takes elements from both, and by adhering to some of those stuffier moments from Dracula, it bogs the story down. But I do agree with you. I think more could have been done visually, especially because a lot of the longer sequences where there's not dialogue or heavy period piece drama-filled moments, that's when the movie is doing its thing, and those are the best scenes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the OG Nosferatu is so good. It's a silent film.
It's also over an hour shorter than this one.
Yeah, exactly. And I do actually have a take on this that I don't know if it would work well, but I think I would like the movie maybe a little bit better having seen it a second time. But I do think the movie would be better watching with the sound off.
Yeah, the music didn't add anything to this. The music was pretty drab, pretty generic. I did not enjoy it. Oftentimes it either felt like it was there because a test screening determined that there was too much silence, or they just felt the need to include it to enhance the tone because there was no inherent tone scene to scene, which is always the sign of, you've accidentally made a weak movie or you've made a series of weak scenes together.
Yeah, if your music is doing a bunch of the heavy lifting, that's usually not a good sign, especially if the music is mediocre or it's attempting to do heavy lifting.
I mean, this movie is an hour and 32 or 132 minutes. I would argue 45 to 60 of those minutes are near perfect. Like, there is some really excellent stuff in this film and some really excellent themes covered.
Yes.
It's just that when you break it apart into the whole, especially, did you dislike Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance in this movie?
I wouldn't say I disliked it. He was fine.
It's just almost every scene he was in was part of what contributed to those really slow moments. And I'm just like, oh, we gotta get through the plot.
Correct. He was a plot device. He was a narrative. He was the narrator, basically. But I think the movie would be a lot better with the sound off. I'm not joking when I say that. I did like that Eggers clearly tried to emphasize the like black and white nature of the movie. Like, the majority of it is essentially black and white without strictly being black and white, which was kind of cool. But going with the symbolism, because you were talking about It has some really excellent symbolic elements. I think that those are the best parts of it, with the basic sort of metaphor being that this woman has to sacrifice herself in order to defeat this beast, defeat this monster. And by sacrificing herself, then she's sacrificing the love that she has for what's the guy's name? John? I don't know. Standard name.
Thomas.
Thomas, sure. Same name. Thomas, John.
John's from Dracula. Thomas is from Nosferatu.
Yeah, so she sacrifices herself for her love, Thomas, therefore also demonstrating her love. But it's also go ahead.
That's Dracula the novel where she does that. She doesn't do that in this movie.
What? She dead.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not debating that. I'm saying that her sacrifice is not for Thomas in this film. Like she pretty explicitly is not doing it because she just loves this guy so much.
It's for everyone.
Well, it's for herself mostly.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there is that aspect as well, I would say. You're saying that like her need for pleasure from Orlok is what drove her to do this? Like the fact she can't stay away from him?
In a way, yes. I mean, I think this movie is most influenced by, if basically you take equal parts Nosferatu the film, Dracula the novel, Bellatar's entire filmography, and Jungian psychology with an emphasis on alchemical individuation and the shadow, and trying to essentially merge the different parts of your unconscious, and mostly the shadow, into the whole. And so through that, the protagonist is, I don't remember the lady's name, Ellen Hutter. So I think by the end, like, it's more about Ellen trying to accept that shadow part of herself, which kills her, more than she's trying to save Thomas, which is part of the incomplete feeling of the movie as a whole.
Yeah, I think that is one of the reasons why I like the end of this movie, is because it does bring the story full circle, right? Because it does open with her, having Orlok come, and they do the deed in the moonlight.
They do the nasty.
Yeah, and like
his open sores on his back, flesh in his head.
Yeah. So like the movie very clearly states that she does have this dark aspect, and she explicitly states that to Thomas, that Orlok is better at doing the dirty than he is, and she enjoys that. Like she clearly explains that. I do think that she does, like, I read the ending as she does this with Orlok at the end because of that, but she also clearly is doing this to kill him, to destroy him, to not continue this. And that is also demonstrative of her love for Thomas. Like, that's folded into her destroying Orlok.
Partially. Like, my counter argument is that this is a film about it's essentially a feminist film. Like, it's a film about the sexual liberation of this Ellen character, and part of it is her shadow side, or her dark side, like her loneliness, seems to be representative visually of her sexual desires, which Thomas is not able to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously Orlok is some kind of metaphor for the fulfillment of those sexual desires. And therefore, there's a scene, I think it's right before Ellen decides to, like, go to bed and let Orlok in, where the Dafoe character tells her, like, oh, you were kind of born in the wrong time. Like, in some ancient time, you would have been some this or something, which I think also works to say, like, you were born in the wrong place and time because you don't get to have an individual identity. You don't get to have this sort of sexual freedom. And so there's also these scenes where she's talking with Emma Corrin's character, and the two of them discuss the same thing, where Corrin is not necessarily content, but has accepted the role as this house mother and housewife. And Taylor Johnson's character is completely dismissive. Like, how dare you try to talk back to me? How dare you try to take freedom into your own hands? And the result of all of this sort of societal pressure is her melancholy. And then, the metaphorical manifestation is Orlok coming in and taking over and replacing Thomas. But I just don't think the film did a lot to tie all of that together because of the Thomas character, which is part of the weakness of the Dracula novel in the first place. Because I like the Dracula novel. I don't think it's either particularly well written, well structured, or well executed in terms of how the characters all flow together.
Certainly not.
And part of that is that, like, Van Helsing and I think it's Mina Harker in the novel.
Yeah.
Those two characters are way more interesting than Jonathan Harker, who's just like a wet rag, the same way that is played out then in this film, and to a much lesser extent the original Nosferatu. But I didn't mean to like dismiss what you said as like not factual. I just don't think that those two ideas, like Harker Thomas being saved by this sacrifice, necessarily relates to this idea of sexual liberation or like the accepting of the shadow, defeating Orlok.
Well, no, because I mean, the end of the movie basically demonstrates that this woman gets her cake and she eats it too, and she kills the beast.
But like, she dies.
Yeah, but she gets everything she wanted. She got it all.
I guess so.
I'm not saying that the death aspect like fits in well with that argument, but what I am saying is that like her dying was the sacrifice to destroy the beast, to destroy the infection that would spread throughout. Meanwhile, the other aspect that we didn't mention that I wanted to is that they like casually tried to have this parallelism with the like plague, like running rampant through the streets, because when Count Orlok's coffin, for lack of a better word, shows up with a ship in Vespers. Was that the name of the town? I don't remember.
Bergs.
Oh, yeah, some strange name.
Why do you hate the German?
I couldn't understand the name. Every time they said it, it sounded differently.
Bergs.
I like German. I love German, but every character said the name differently.
Visburg, Wisburg.
Nicholas Hoult said it at one point, and I thought he said Lisbon. So, it was confusing. So anyway, whenever his like coffin shows up, it's a bunch of rats that are carrying the plague, and the plague has a huge outbreak in this town, which also didn't really come full circle. They were just like, oh, here's this atmospheric parallelism between vampires that infect people, and then also the plague is happening. This bad thing is also happening. So like I'm basically saying that Lily Rose Depp is finishing off the circle. Like she's completing the full circle. She's able to fulfill her desires by being with Orlok, but also she completes the circle by finishing him off, by killing him. But then she has to give up her life with Thomas in doing so. So she makes that ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah. So that's that whole Jungian individuation thing that I'm talking about.
My point is that I'm saying she is demonstrating her love for him by doing that.
Okay.
Does that fully come through in the movie? No.
So yeah, that we agree on. I guess that's the point I was trying to make, is that these two ideas are just incongruent. And that's a symptom of the larger failure of the film in general, is that there's no marriage between all of the thematic fun elements that Egger is obsessed with that are present in his other work and the story of Dracula or the story of Nosferatu.
Yeah, the ending was good in that way, but it still felt like it was missing that like kind of final punch. Like I was expecting there to be like another maybe like 2 minutes after it of something, but then it just ended. And I was like, oh, got to think about that one.
Well, it was Ellen's story. It wasn't Thomas's story. It wasn't Willem Dafoe's story. It wasn't even Orlok's story.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting anything with them. I was suggesting something that was done with Ellen's body or something like that. Like, I don't know.
They showed it. It was dead with the skelly and the flowers.
I'm aware. I'm talking about like literally the first minute after finishing watching the movie.
No, she's dead. It's over. We're moving. Yeah, I think we're honestly in agreement then about that. It's my counter argument to that point, because I liked the ending. My only counter would be he had 2 hours to make up any of those thematic elements. There were 2 hours before the 15-minute final sequence of burning the crypt and her accepting Orlok. That's any of that work could have been put in. Any of that groundwork could have been laid.
Yeah, I don't know. The drama aspect or like tension aspect didn't really fully come through for me in a lot of ways. Like the one tense, I mean, obviously there were a number of tense scenes, but the one tense scene that worked really well was the one where Emma comes out in the middle of the night and has the candle, and it like pans to the stairs, and you're watching the stairs and you're like, oh fuck, like something is about to come up the stairs, and then it pans back to her and you're like, oh no, please God, no, and then it's just Lily Rose Depp and she's like, hey, and then like that scene was great and I needed more of that shit.
Oh, I would have cut that scene straight out of the movie. Snip. Didn't add anything for me.
I liked it.
My issue was the total framing, and it's why I called it a mediocre screenplay, because the framing of the film was so inherently on this psychological process that Ellen needed to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they still had to spend all the time to be like, but it's also a Dracula story. It's also Nosferatu. We got to get in the 30 minutes of he goes over the Carpathian Mountains and he goes to the big spooky, and all those scenes were perfect. Like every scene with him in Orlok's castle were phenomenal.
Yeah.
The problem is they didn't do a great job of then tying those back to Ellen. There was a scene where Orlok is like fucking with Thomas in the castle, and then he like does some stupid dream shit with his fingers, and it like and it like cuts to Ellen, dreaming of him. That was a good cut. But there were multiple other cuts where they're just in the castle doing all the fun haunted house spooky time. And then it just cuts to them like on the beach, just like trudging along melancholically, like, I'm filled with such melancholy. Why are you filled with such melancholy? And I was like, get this shit. I'm done with this. I don't want any more of this. Oh, but look at the costumes. No.
There was a number of like period piece stuff that was crammed in, which was odd. Yeah, that contributed to the poor pacing of the movie, was because it was rooted in a pretty mediocre script. The one other aspect that I did not talk about was I felt like it was actually too symbolically repetitive, or like images were too repetitious. So like they did the whole like finger shadow thing way too much for me. Like I liked the finger shadow thing, but then when they did it another like 8 times, I was like, okay.
Don't you get it?
I understand.
Didn't you read A Man and His Symbols? Didn't you read Archetypes? Didn't you read Young? Call Young the shadow. Don't you get it?
Right, but the beginning of the movie did something in a really creative way with the like diaphanous curtains that like you could see his shadow like inside of the curtains, and they like start the movie off like, hey, look at this like cutting edge shit that we're introducing in the movie, and then it was just like, look at this hooked shadow that's coming up, and it's got your shadow. I got your shadow.
It was the same as the money shot, essentially, of the hand shadow going over the entire town of Visburg. It was like, this is cool, but like I already understood that his influence had corrupted the town.
That's what I mean.
You could have shown just that scene and then cut to the doctor talking about how the plague has taken everyone. I can't believe. Like, you didn't need to show me that scene and 10 minutes of like, I can't believe all these people are sick. Let's do a 3-minute tracking shot of people in the town being sick. which backs up your point earlier about them overusing these sets. It's like the idea, we built all these great sets, we need to show them off. It's like, well, either give me the shadow hand over going over top or give me the people in the street being sick. Don't give me both.
Yeah, it was too repetitious, covering the same ground, literally. But yeah, I mean, I think that this movie actually is helping me as a writer, because right now I'm revising the book that I wrote, and I'm cutting like big pieces that are too repetitive, basically. So I think that this is actually like a pretty good demonstration of how to use symbols well, and how when you overuse symbols, it actually detracts from the power of those symbols. Like, you can have motifs in a story, but when you like beat the shit out of your audience with those symbols, they're like, holy hell, like, yes, I see them. Or like, I don't know, maybe people really liked it because they're dumb and they just didn't get it the first few times they saw it in the movie, so they needed it another 3 times. But I actually think that the movie, assuming the audience is stupid, is a detraction from the movie. But
Well, I think Eggers films, by and large, when viewed by wide audiences, because he has managed to become fairly mainstream. This is about as much people think his movies are good but not great, and the ones who think they're great typically they're not like, oh, they're masterpieces. I mean, he has like his cult fans who probably love all 4 of his movies, or there's people who think this one's a masterpiece, that one's a masterpiece, whatever. The reason I was smiling and trying to hold back laughter earlier is because I had seen, as I mentioned to you before we started today, The Last Voyage of the Demeter earlier in the week before seeing this. And I'll tell you what, if you thought this, had some issues with overusing symbols, that movie was a masterclass in how not to write or direct a film, especially one about Dracula, where you have to use, cross-laden symbology.
yeah,
There's so many shots where it's just like, he died, but he had a cross in his hand. What could it mean?
yeah, and I'm not saying that this movie is like bad in that way. Like, it's not that it's showing you like necessarily what not to do. It's just showing you that it needs to be tweaked a little bit, and like you need to cut back. Less is more in regards to symbols. At least in my opinion. We could have done with less is more symbolism within the movie, and if not less is more, then just choosing to show the same symbol in a slightly different way. That said, I actually think that the symbol of the cross was utilized quite well in the movie, because it wasn't overdone. I don't know if you remember, it's one of the first images. There's an image of like the window either behind a character, or a character leaves the space and it like just is framing the window, and the like window perfectly makes like a cross, like a crucifix, just reminiscent of that. Like, it was clearly intentional.
Well, yeah, I think if the explicit part of the film is that Ellen is being haunted by this, allegorical representation of her dark side and her sexual desires, then the implicit visual nature of the film is that part of these being described as perverted, or her being in some way perverse, is because of the church and Catholic or Christian belief at the time, which, would have not allowed her to have said thoughts or feelings without
expressly
being
forbade.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the vision, sometimes it just felt more like we have to put the crosses here because it was either a historic thing or because it would just set it in the book.
Well, I'm just saying there weren't like 4 scenes where characters held up crucifixes and they just like put them in front of you like too much. Early on that happened a couple times, but that was like building up tension. Like, don't go to the castle bad.
I want to say there were 7 or 8 times that the film cut to that same beach that they just hung out on and looked at the water, and every single one of them had a cross because of the graves buried.
Yeah.
When he goes to the castle, there's like a wooden crate filled with wooden crosses. He's given a cross by the Roma folks on the way there. Gypsies.
You were trying to avoid saying
trying not to say gypsies.
No, but yeah,
I mean, they literally
I felt
are
like
Romas.
I felt like that symbol was used correctly, and it because it is so central to the vision within like a Dracula movie, it wasn't overdone. Like they could have easily crammed in way more of it, and I'm glad that they didn't. I do not have any more to say about the movie. I don't want to prattle on too much. Do you have anything more that we skipped over?
I'm scrolling through now just to see if there's anything I missed. I mean, did you like the cinematography as a whole? You kind of said that you had criticisms of some of the staging and blocking elements.
I felt like it was good, but I wanted more of it because I wanted less talking. So I would have appreciated it more had there been more of it.
Okay.
Like what little there was in it felt like it felt emotionally stunted in a way, because then we just got to a place and I was just like, oh God, now I get to turn my brain off because you're explaining what the contrivances are of the movie.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I wanted to cover is, so we've had a conversation before, done an episode on Robert Eggers as a filmmaker, and sort of talked about his 3 films. And I don't remember the conversation particularly well as to how much we sort of related the 3 of his previous works together, but they all do have one very consistent through line, which is a very objective examination of the effect of myth on people through different time periods in different places, and the way in which these myths and beliefs cause strife in society and cause people to believe one way or another in something supernatural, which the film itself rarely makes explicit. And so in some ways, I think the reason this may actually be my least favorite work by Eggers so far is because it so quickly makes the supernatural element real. And there's really only one character who doubts it. And so myth is not really an element of the work in that way. It's just kind of treated like it's real. And so the visual symbology occasionally makes reference to this, but it doesn't really ever do a good job of marrying the idea through. And so in some ways it feels like philosophically a departure from Eggers' other work. And the reason I wanted to point this out is because I know Eggers wrote a script for the Nosferatu before he even made The Witch. And I think he had been trying to make it for years and years. And, just because his other films were not even necessarily commercially successful, but critically successful, that he built up the goodwill and had the confidence to remake a movie he loved in Nosferatu. And so my hope is that part of the reason that the script feels underbaked or underwhelming or not really getting everything to work together is because the script was older. It was something he worked on before. And so compared to some of his other works, the ideas didn't always all come through together, but there is something similar, something almost amateurish about the writing that is present in The Northman as well.
Yeah.
And I think The Northman and Nosferatu share that in common, that they're both really well-directed films that just needed more work done on the script to make them work as a whole. And the weakness of that script, and I don't just mean dialogue, obviously, I hope from what we've both been talking about that script can mean everything, the characterizations, the pacing, the structure, neither of them really wholly affect the images. Like there's still great images in both, and I'm not just arbitrarily taking shots at the Northman either, but there's still so many great images in Nosferatu that you can tell that Eggers could see the movie in his head and probably made the vision that he wanted to see. I just hope as a result he can learn to be a better writer, or learn how to meld the material that he wants to see better to a more refined script.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that he obviously this is not a wholly original work. He seems to do better with more original work, but yeah, that's also my hope as well. So after all of that, I would definitely recommend watching the movie for sure. Definitely a good movie. Not a great movie in both of our opinions, but I did very much enjoy it, and I am really looking forward to anything that Eggers puts out, because you and I both really like his stuff and like his style and really like the projects that he's also interested in. So
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend this to everybody. Obviously, there's enough horror elements that I wouldn't recommend it to someone who just enjoys The Crown or Downton Abbey or
sex.
right. If you're a prude, I wouldn't recommend it because there's a couple of tits in the film. There's moaning. I guess that's enough to get some people to no.
Literally holding a crucifix up.
And the slower pace, like if you're someone that needs there to be a clear story from start to, like if you're the opposite of, you and me, if you're like, no, I need the story to be there the whole time, none of that stupid atmospheric shit. I don't want any meaning. I just want people to tell me what it means.
I was gonna say you and I are both like, give us that atmosphere, please. Like, get away from the story.
Fuck the story. The images tell the story. I don't want to hear these dopes talking.
Yeah, that about does it. Got anything more?
Oh, Bellatar. Watch Bellatar movies.
Okay.
There's a lot of that in this, and I won't hammer on the point for too long for the fear of us being like Eggers and overstaying our welcome.
No, I just really got to go to the bathroom. And I don't have anything more to say, so you better get it out.
But yeah, I wish we could do an effect where we flip the light on and off, like the SpongeBob episode, and then it's Nosferatu.
Yeah, I wish I could have that as a GIF in the background. So Bellatar.
Yeah, there's visually tons and tons of references to his work. There, more than visually, there's a lot of that in here.
Awesome.
Great Hungarian filmmaker.
Till next time, everyone. Adios.